This is Revolutionizing Recruitment with Kathleen Duffy, the art of attracting, acquiring, and retaining talent. Here's Kathleen.
My guest this week is Eric Bailey, the best-selling author of The Cure for Stupidity and the president of Bailey Strategic Innovation Group, one of the fastest-growing human communication consulting firms in the United States. Eric is also an award-winning keynote speaker, a board member of the YMCA, and a lifetime learner of human and organizational psychology. Eric, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Kathleen.
Well, it's great to have you. Well, I have to kick off our conversation by congratulating you and your wife, Jamie, on your selection to the 2022 class of Sun Devil 100.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to join. There's amazing company there, Kathleen. Congratulations to you as well.
Well, thanks. It's and for those people that are not familiar with the Sun Devil 100, it is an award that recognizes 100 of the fastest growing organizations owned or led by ASU alumni, Arizona State University alumni, and is one of the reasons, in my humble opinion, that ASU is ranked number one in innovation ahead of MIT and Stanford.
Absolutely.
So, Eric, tell us your Sun Devil story. I know you graduated with a degree in graphic design, but what was that trajectory that led you to pursue a master's degree in leadership and organizational development from St. Louis University?
Yeah, so I call my story kind of Forrest Gumpian. I was born and raised in the Seattle area, and I moved down to Arizona to run track at Arizona State University. And being a college athlete who wanted to study graphic design was really difficult to do because the college was actually on the East Campus, about 45 minutes away from my dorm. So I had to ride a bus or I had to, borrow a car every day and then get back in time for practice. And so it was a really, really tough situation for a while. And I had some injuries on the track team and my hamstring. But eventually, after quite a bit of time, I wasn't a typical four-year student, but after quite a bit of time, I eventually got my bachelor's degree in graphic design. And so I started working in marketing. And while I was working in marketing for a healthcare firm, I was invited to a leadership development program at the organization I was working with. And the gentleman who ran the program pulled me aside after my first meeting and he said, Eric, your participation is unique. You're seeing connections that a lot of people don't see. Have you ever thought about looking into organizational development? And I was like, I've never heard of what that is. And so he actually started pulling me aside once a week and just doing coaching, training. What I didn't know was actually grooming. He was looking for a director of organizational development. And I, not knowing that was even a field, eventually he said, hey, here's a job description. Would you like it? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. It was like my ideal job. And so then after I started the job, I said, I think I want to get my MBA. That's, what you're supposed to do next. And he said, well, why don't you pursue a master's in organizational development? I was like, I didn't even know that was a thing. And so I went to St. Louis University because they had a great online master's in OD, organizational development. Because I have 3 kids, I can't move across the country or study abroad in China, which is one of the options. And so one of my professors there he's written a series of textbooks on organizational psychology. And when I got to those classes, it really lit me up. And so from there, I realized that I have this ability to translate like really dense psychology papers, like 30-page papers, and translate them into normal human speak. And so I started to build a business around that, me and my wife, and that was 6.5 years ago, and now we're doing really well. So it's really interesting journey that kind of spans several different organizations and industries, but it all kind of comes back to helping humans communicate more effectively.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't know that part of your story. So talk to us about your book, The Cure for Stupidity. I know it is a primer for curing the stupidity around us. So tell us why you wrote it.
Yeah, so I wrote it because I do a lot of work with organizations all around the world, and as I work with them, whether it's a workshop or a series of workshops, I can only get through a couple of my principles. I call them the principles of human understanding, and they're essentially 22 principles that are the brain science and psychology behind leadership, communication, collaboration, and relating with one another. And I'm never able to get through all 22 of the principles over a normal period of time with an organization. And so people kept asking me, like, well, how can I get all of them? And so after about 3 years of running our business, I sat down and I started writing the book. And, it turned into this really wonderful exploration of the principles in kind of a deeper way. And originally it was actually called Predicting the Irrational. And the subtitle was the Cure for Stupidity Around Us. And every time I would kind of tell people what the title was, when I got to that last part, everyone just got really excited. And so I'm like, okay, pay attention to the world around you. Like, this is the thing that's emotionally resonating with people. And the reason I wrote it is because, we're in a society where we are increasingly disengaging from each other. Like, we are increasingly divided. We are increasingly kind of villainizing, quote unquote, the other team. And when I realized it doesn't have to be that way. Right? It does. If we understand where we're coming from, we can realize that we're far more alike than we are different. And so this is the book, right? Everyone out there is saying, "Oh, you're so stupid. Everyone's so stupid. These people are stupid." Well, if we understand these principles, it changed the way in which we judge them. And so, actually, spoiler alert, right? The cure for stupidity is not in fixing them, but in fixing the way we see the world and the context around them. So it's actually in us.
Yeah, all around the self-awareness. So you talk about disengaging from each other. So how has all this changed? I mean, we were doing this pre-pandemic, right? So now we're post, continuing, whatever. It's our new normal. How has these common communication barriers changed or gotten worse?
In some situations, it's actually better because, we have to be more efficient in our communications within our teams at work, right? There's just certain situations where we don't have the opportunity to meet in ways we would have before. So I have to be more clear in my communication. However, in many cases, it's actually worse. And what I mean by that is in some of the deeper foundational issues that we hold personally core to us, whether it's, religion or politics or just our ideas of what society should be, right? We actually hold those pretty foundational. Well, we actually, because of the ways in which we're communicating now, which is more digital than it was before, we actually have this weird veneer of safety to be more candid and be less kind. And so you see a lot of people writing horrible things and jumping to horrible conclusions, like at the drop of a hat, before they actually take the time to even engage and understand one another, the other person. And so what we see out there is a lot of people getting really hurt emotionally. A lot of people saying things that maybe they would regret later or wouldn't have said first face to face. I mean, imagine the scenario where you're driving in traffic and someone cuts you off and you get really upset at them and you're saying all the things in your car by yourself and you're like, oh, if I had the opportunity, I would tell them off. And then you pull into the same parking lot to the grocery store and you get out at the same time, and like all of a sudden that all goes away, because when we're face to face as humans, we have this natural ability to connect deeper, and so all that just kind of like, I guess I didn't need to say all those things about you, I'm so sorry, right, in my head. But when we have this kind of bubble of protection, when we don't actually have to engage, you see people jump quicker to those kinds of those quick conclusions, those quick judgments. And we see a lot of people, that we're dealing with what we call the Great Resignation. A lot of it has to do with our inability to form those kinds of deeper connections. And people are just upsetting one another and saying, you're just too sensitive, instead of actually connecting on a human level.
Interesting, because I was going to ask you about that, about, with the Great Resignation, the Great Restructuring, is it going to be hybrid? Is it going to be remote work? I mean, there's so many conversations that are going on right now.
Right.
How is that impacting all of this?
Oh my gosh, it is incredible where we are right now. So we're at a place, and people want to kind of blame it on a generation. Oh, it's the boomers. Oh, it's the millennials. Oh, it's the Gen Z. Oh, it's the Gen X. It has less to do with generational differences and has more to do with people are in a place where we've been experiencing extreme levels of stress for a very long time. And what I mean by that, whether you're experiencing physical stress, emotional stress, or relationship stress, we've been dealing with this weird uncertainty, right? And uncertainty. And so I do a lot of work in brain science. I'm a geek for this stuff. But actually, when we're experiencing uncertainty or we're experiencing change or experiencing physical pain, it actually lights up the same part of the brain. And so we've been dealing with a lot of uncertainty for a long period of time. Are we wearing masks? Are we not wearing masks? Are we vaccinating? Or we're not vaccinating? Is this thing airborne? Is this thing through washing hands and touching things? Like there's just so much uncertainty. Am I going back to work? Am I not going back to work? And all of that actually bears a toll on our emotional well-being and our brains. And so a lot of the stuff we're seeing right now is people saying, hold on, I was doing good in this environment, whatever the environment may be. And now you're saying I can't do it anymore. I've got to do something different. And what happens is that people are bumping up against maybe a more restrictive or maybe more stubborn employer saying, no, you have to do it this way. You have to show up for work in this manner because this is the way that I say has to be done. Well, a lot of people are saying, I don't want to. A gentleman that I'm really good friends with was working in IT. And when the pandemic happened, he started working from home. He started becoming 50% more productive in the number of tickets he was able to clear. And he was just loving life. He was at home. He was cooking with his kids and his family life was growing. His productivity at work was growing. And all of a sudden, a couple layers up, they said, nope, you need to come back to the office. And so he's like, okay, I guess I'll come back to the office because, he's, a compliant guy. Well, now he has to wake up an hour earlier to, get ready. And then he has to leave an hour early to sit in traffic on the way into work, by which he's not getting paid for. And then he has to get an hour commute back home. So that's 2 hours plus an hour earlier waking up. So that's 3 hours of his day every day. So 15 hours a week extra. And it's not like, hey, here's, you're working 15 hours more. No, he's taking 15 hours away from his family that he was enjoying quite a bit to be less productive at work. And so he actually ended up leaving right after having conversations, and they were very like, nope, we're doing it this way. And he said, you know what, it's not worth it to me. And he actually started his own business and now is making more money and he has more time with family. And, I think a lot of things are happening in this way where we're bumping up against what could it be versus what people are saying it should be.
Yeah, interesting. We hear those stories over and over and over again. And sometimes I just think with some of these leaders, I'm like, shame on you. Just ask the question, what's going to work best. And but, it gets back to the whole, and I have this conversation with probably every single person I speak with on my podcast. It's all about trust, right?
Right.
And that's the biggest thing. So you talk about being a brain science geek. But you also mentioned how you can turn that into normal human speak.
Yes.
So that is a real gift because it is really goes over my head. So how do you do that?
Well, so it's funny, like all of the answers are out there. And if you were to spend a year and just nonstop read all of the peer-reviewed journals on psychology and neuroscience, we could answer every question. Like, why does this person behave this way? Oh, they behave this way because of X, Y, and Z. And it's all out there. But the problem is, researchers write for researchers, right? They write because they're super intelligent. And a lot of times the language just doesn't make any sense. And so when I was going through my master's program, it was actually part of my curriculum to read, digest, and relay. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, this is really important. I see this happen every day at work. And one of them, for example, the principle that I call the illusion of certainty. Essentially, this idea that our brains like to project that we are certain, even if we're not certain. And what it does is it actually reinforces our ego. It reinforces our confidence. And so, for example, I call myself a recovering HR person. So in HR, a lot of times, I would be responsible for collecting all of the employee surveys. And so, I would ask all these department heads, hey, when are you going to finish your employee surveys? When are you going to finish, or employee reviews? When are you going to finish your employee reviews? And they say, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm busy right now, but a week from Tuesday, they'll all be back to you. Right. Mm-hmm. And then they fail to meet their own self-imposed deadline, right? The certainty that they projected to me wasn't actually certainty. Right. It was a projection that their brain said, oh, I know I can do this, but they weren't actually certain. And that shows up all the time. I mean, when we have an idea about something, very quickly, we grab onto that idea and say, this is the solution to the problem. This is the one solution to the problem. Or if we see the world in a certain way, the illusion of certainty grabs onto us. And instead of saying, I see the world this way, we say, the world is this way. And what happens a lot of times, we come at conflict with other people who see the world differently, or someone who's had a different experience than we do, and we just butt heads with them. And we say, there must be something, you must be stupid, there must be something wrong with you. But in reality, no, they just see the world differently. And that's one of those concepts, it's called the illusion of knowledge. There's a whole bunch of concepts that kind of roll into what I call the illusion of certainty. And when I explain it in a way that helps people relate to it, they're like, oh, I never saw that before, and now I can see it. And when people can see it, my whole goal is to get people curious. And if people can be curious, now when we engage with each other when we disagree, I might say, instead of you're wrong, you're stupid, you're an idiot, I might say something like, help me understand why you see it that way. Help me understand why you interpreted my words that way. Right? And now we can have this really cool human connection instead of me trying to put you in a place.
Well, that leads me to the whole concept of difficult conversations. Mm-hmm. And you introduced us to one of your friends, Jeff Harry, who was a guest on my podcast recently, and we talked about having difficult conversations. And you've said that we go into difficult conversations to understand or to be right. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fight to be right. Yes.
Fight to be right. Yeah. So how do you approach a difficult conversation, Eric?
So practically, the first thing that I do, because I don't like difficult conversations any more than the next person does, but right. I have put myself in situations
which may be why people are avoiding the performance reviews, right?
Exactly. And so I try to put myself in them as much as possible, because when you think about jumping into a pool, like if it's the water's chilly, you're anxious and you don't want to do it, but you do it, and eventually, like, the chill doesn't bother you as much. And so I try to put myself in situations where I'm having difficult conversations, like, ooh, I'm avoiding that. Okay, let me try. Okay, I'm avoiding this one. Okay, let me try. Because the more that you do it, the less the chill will bother you, or the less the discomfort will bother you. And so my first thing that I do is I start by saying, this is hard for me to say. This is hard for me to bring up. And what that does to the other person psychologically is it puts, they have a little bit of concern, maybe a little bit of pity, a little bit of kindness or empathy for whatever. Okay, let me make this as easy as I can for you, and not knowing what's coming, right? But what it does is I'm genuinely having a hard time with it, so I'm being candid, right? This is hard for me to say. And then I say, here's the situation, and I lay it out. And what I'm monitoring for when I start having a difficult conversation is I'm monitoring for the contextual physiology of both of us. So what I mean by that is, when I get into an emotional state, there are certain physiological things that happen to me. I start to sweat profusely from my armpits. I notice my lower lip will start to quiver. I will notice that I'll get cotton mouth, and I'll start stumbling over my words, right? So don't edit that out. That was intentionally stuttered, right? And so, right. So what I notice that these physiological things happen to me when I'm in that emotional state. And so I can monitor for those. When those things happen to me, the frontal lobe of my brain is actually receiving less blood oxygen, because my body is actually reacting to physical harm and danger. And so my body is reacting like I'm face to face with a saber-toothed tiger back when I was a caveman, right? And so if we're having this conversation, I'm monitoring for that, because I want to make sure I stay as present and as human in the conversation as possible. So when those things start to happen to me, I take a deep breath, I slow down, I monitor myself. And I'm also monitoring the physiological reactions in you as well. Let's say that you and I are having the conversation. And I'm monitoring for common things like blotchy skin, turning red. Noticing, heart rate increasing, blood pressure increasing, breathing rates increasing, tears. Sometimes people will tear up. People will clench their jaws, clench their fists. And so I'm just kind of monitoring all of these physiological reactions that can be happening to you, because if that happens, that means that you're feeling defensive. And if someone is defensive, they are not going to hear what I'm intending for them to hear. They're not going to react in the way I'm hoping they're going to react. And so think if you ever give someone any kind of critical feedback, right, that's sometimes a difficult conversation. And if it's important for them to change behavior based on that feedback, but they're defensive, they're not going to hear you. They're not going to react and change their behavior. They're going to get upset and point out why you're wrong. They're going to fight. And so all of these are actually physiological signs of the body preparing to fight or flee. In psychology, we call this the stress response, the fight, flight, or freeze response. And so when you're monitoring those physiological reactions, and if someone starts to exhibit those behaviors, you can say, okay, I'm going to pause here. I notice you're having a reaction to this. I want to be very clear. I respect you. The reason that I'm having this conversation is because I want you to continue being as great as I know you are. And the reason we do that is one of the things that people start to get defensive because they feel like they're being attacked by a saber-tooth tiger, but also they feel that they've lost respect. And respect is one of those things that we say in the book. Respect is like oxygen. When it's there, no one thinks about it. But if you take it away, that's all anyone can think about. And so when people feel that they've lost respect or they've been disrespected, they will try to regain respect by any means necessary. And that's where the kind of the fight comes in. People actually start to fight to be right, prove that you're wrong, prove that they're intelligent or whatever. And so if you can make sure that they feel respected, then keep going in the conversation. So that's how I do difficult conversations, kind of monitoring the physiology, but also making sure that along the way, they know that they are respected as a human. Maybe their opinion is wrong, maybe their conclusions are wrong, but I respect them as a human. And from that foundation, we can move forward in dialogue.
So I'm sure that there are lots of mistakes that we all make in having these difficult conversations, but it would seem from what you just said, one of the biggest is that we don't take time or acknowledge how to respect the person that we're having that conversation with.
Absolutely. One of the primary things that you want to hold in your head in a difficult conversation is, as certain as you are that your position is rational and logical and follows a series of steps to reach your conclusion, they also believe that their argument is rational and logical and follows a series of steps to reach their conclusion. And the reason that needs to be foundational in your argument or in your discussion is you want to say, why would a rational, reasonable person conclude what they've concluded? And what you're doing by saying that in your head, you don't have to say this out loud, but when you say that, you're providing them the respect that they are due as a human. And when you do that, you actually show up differently. Your tone is different. You might even be curious because you can't figure it out in their head. Why would a rational, logical person conclude what they've concluded? You may want to get curious and say, okay, I know you're intelligent. I know you're rational. I know you're logical. I don't understand how you got to that conclusion. Can you help me? And what you do there with that curiosity is you actually put yourself at a learner's power position. So kind of this idea of power levels. There's the teacher, which is inherently a higher power position, and the learner, which is inherently a lower power position. And when you put yourself at the position of the learner, it's hard for people to feel that you are threatening them. Right? Because, you've lowered yourself. Okay. And you see them relax. And they're really excited to share with you their logic and data and reasoning. Now, one thing that's really important to hold on to in what I call dialogue meaning two people are communicating back and forth, is this idea that to understand them and understand them as a human, it's not required for you to change your opinion. Right? To have a conversation with them, it's not required. The goal should not be to change their opinion. The goal should be to understand one another. And when you understand one another, you might both decide to conclude something different. You might both conclude to stay wherever you were before, but with the new understanding that they are a rational human being and, oh, I understand them better. And if you think about this, I mean, I don't know, Kathleen, if there's ever been a situation where you just feel totally understood by another human being. It is the best feeling. Right? It feels so like someone completely sees you and all that you've gone through, all that you've done, and they totally like, I see you. Why wouldn't we then try to give that to as many people as possible?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, and as you're talking, I'm thinking about the voice that employees feel that they have today.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about your friend who was in IT and ended up leaving an employer and starting his own business. And I was asking another podcast guest, JT O'Donnell, about this, and she does career coaching. And I was asking her to tell some stories, just like you did. And she said, actually, I'm trying to help people to go back and maybe she didn't use these words, but I'm just thinking, have these difficult conversations with their employer ahead of time to say, here's what I need today, whether it's, the flexibility to be able to work remotely more often, if I'm feeling my compensation is off, my benefits, whatever that is, right? Are you hearing more of those types of conversations coming from the employee upward because they feel like they have a louder voice today?
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of employees don't want to leave. Right? They're comfortable. They like where they're working. I was actually just talking with my father-in-law a couple of months ago, and he's been working with this organization for maybe a year, 2-3 years. And he's done really well. He's the highest performing person in his job title. And what he saw was new people coming into the company were being paid 20% more than he was being paid because the job market is what it is. People are getting signing bonuses and ridiculous salaries. And he's like, hey, this isn't fair. Right? I'm producing more than everybody else. I'm training all of these new people, right? I'm creating all of these new systems for the organization. It seems fair that I should at least be getting paid what the new people are making. And so we actually worked together for a period of a week or so, and we put together his difficult conversation with the CEO. And he said, here's the data I would like to share with him. And I said, okay, this is great. This probably is just, adding stuff for that's not going to be relevant. But what are you asking for? What are you looking for? What's your reasoning behind it? And so we kind of workshopped a conversation, and he went and he put together this wonderful, wonderful presentation. And he started the same way I coached him. This is difficult for me to say, but thank you for having the conversation. And the CEO responded. He said, I've never had an employee have a conversation like this with me. Thank you so much. Let me see what we can do. Right. And so they ended up, working through it. And, he didn't get exactly what he wanted, but he feels like he was heard and he got quite a bit of what he wanted. And that was best case for him because he loved the organization. He just was feeling to the point where it was no longer fair. And that's something that's really important for employers to understand is that people want to keep thinking that you drive with money, right? You drive people with money. But actually, one of the things that I mentioned earlier, my professor who's in organizational psychology, he actually did a series of studies and found that money is not the number one motivator of employee engagement. Right? Money is a factor, right? Don't get me wrong. Money is a factor,
right.
But people just need to feel that they are being paid fairly. And once you've reached that threshold of fairly, right, the money is not the top. And so then all of a sudden there's so many more things. And so what my father-in-law, he felt all of a sudden he's being paid fairly. And now he's really re-engaged again. He's throwing out more ideas and being creative. And so it's really interesting. Yeah, we see a lot of these. People don't want to leave necessarily. But if they feel that it's not fair, that's when people are starting to maybe have the different kinds of conversations.
And you have won Son-in-Law of the Year, I'm guessing. All right, Eric. Stand by. We have to stop here. But coming up in the second part of my conversation with Eric Bailey, the author of The Cure for Stupidity, Eric discusses the intersection of talent acquisition and diversity, equity, and inclusion.
You see a lot of people doing blind applications right now, kind of like The Voice. You see people doing blind interviews because whether we like to think so or not, we do have feelings about people and their gender. We do have feelings, right? Biases, not the same thing as behaviors. Not the same thing as behaviors, but we do have these feelings.
This has been Revolutionizing Recruitment with Kathleen Duffy. To connect with Kathleen or to learn more about recruitment research, go to duffygroup.com.